Well, for me, it's almost more, I don't know, what would you call it? Existential dread? I know that's like a horrible word or something, but I don't tend to get depressed, I just tend to get quiet. I don't typically suffer from depression. I realize I'm very lucky that way. Generally, I have a pretty optimistic outlook.
Disinformation is spreading.
There will be a surprise
We
outbreak
only have
as
so many
the issue
beds.
of pandemic.
No
This
social
is not how I
distancing
thought
at
I would
all.
end
They
college.
said that they would
We didn't
express
know
their
it would be
concerns
this,
about the mask supply.
drastic.
Where's the mask? Where's the glove?
One expert says a second
Get
wave
away
is
from all of these
We all
people.
need some good news.
A message for all the healthcare workers out there.
Thank you.
If you're looking for hope tonight, raise your hand. If you feel alone and don't understand, if you're fighting the fight of your life, then stand. We're gonna make
From Santa Rosa, California, this is 19 Stories. I'm Cheryl Holling. Jodi Krangle is a singer, songwriter, voice artist, host, and producer of the podcast Audio Branding, The Hidden Gem of Marketing, a member of the folk music acoustic trio Urban Tapestry, a 2018 Sovis Award winner, self-taught computer nerd, website designer, and creator of the Muse's Muse, a well-known songwriting resource website. Jodi's first voiceover work was in 1995 when she spent a year in a volunteer position with the Canadian National Institute for the Blind, creating books on tape. And by tape, she means reel-to-reel tape. In 2007, she ventured into voiceover work full-time. Since then, she has voiced in every major genre with some of the largest name brands in the world. Her slogan, "World-class sound, gold standard service," truly describes my next guest. Jodi Krangle, welcome to 19 Stories.
Thanks so much for having me. That was quite the intro.
Like the career you've had. Thank you for being here with me today. And how are you doing?
I'm doing okay, actually. We're, considering we're in more of a lockdown than we even were yesterday or a few days ago. But hopefully there's a light at the end of the tunnel.
And you say more than a few days ago. And first of all, what part of the world are you in?
I am I'm just north of Toronto, Canada. So Ontario, our province, was in sort of like a modified phase 2 or something right up until probably like 3 days ago, something like that. Maybe even 2 days ago. And then all of a sudden they decided, well, all of a sudden, I mean, the numbers are what the numbers are. They put us into a deeper lockdown. And so now we're basically not supposed to go out unless we absolutely need to.
Now, is that because there's been an increase in cases and hospitalizations, or what are they attributing that to?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think they're just really worried that right now they just don't have enough vaccines to go around and it's still raging. So they're trying to make sure that the hospitals are able to handle people and that there are less cases and that there are less deaths, really, ultimately.
Well, since it's safe to say you're in the thick of winter at this point,
Yes.
which is a little bit different. In a previous conversation, we talked about the difference
Mhm.
between a Northern California winter and a Ontario, Canada winter.
Yeah. A little different. Yeah.
And since you work from home with your voice work, how has the shelter-in-place directives affected you, if at all?
Well, they really haven't. I mean, you know, I'm an inside person anyway. So, so really, honestly, this hasn't changed much for me at all. I just get my groceries delivered. That's basically it. And I've been working from home probably since I started in 2007, going full time. So, this really isn't all that new for me. Luckily, I know I could be in a much worse position.
Certainly with a lot of the people who have never worked from home and had to adjust to what that new normal means.
Mhm.
And given that you did the work for the Canadian Institute for the Blind, that was in 1995. So 2007, you went full time.
Mhm.
What was the kind of turning and deciding point for you to venture into voice work full time in 2007?
That's an interesting question, and I would have to answer boredom. I was doing internet marketing and SEO before that. I kind of started doing that in 95, and I worked with clients right up until 2007. And by the time I left, I was already self-employed, so really all it was a focus shift. And by the time I decided to make that shift in 2007, I was so bored with SEO and internet marketing. I just couldn't do it for another hour.
And yet it's interesting you kind of have the term that you used on describing yourself as a computer nerd, and most computer nerds really enjoy. In fact, if let's back up for a moment. SEO, for the listeners who aren't familiar with that term, what does that mean?
Oh, it's search engine optimization. Yeah.
And what does
So,
that do?
well, what it is being higher up, your website being higher up in the search engines. So it's a kind of a mix between art and science. And when I first started it in 95, there were a lot more search engines to be worrying about for this. But when I left in 2007, Google was the only game in town. And for me, that was just boring.
Now, is that who you were working for at the time?
Oh, no, no, no.
Oh, okay.
No, I had clients of my own that had come to me through various means, and I was working with them as a contractor, basically. I was helping them get their website higher in the search engines so that they would get more business.
Which is why we have certain websites, for surfing that they pop up all the time because they're normally
Hmm.
websites that people visit more often. So I wanted to clarify that for people who weren't
Sure.
familiar with that term. So doing that kind of work, SEO work, and having clients in that realm to voice work. And I want to talk about certainly about your music and your singing, which predated your voice work and certainly complements it. How did you make that shift? I mean, you obviously volunteered, you did that probably out of love
Hmm.
and a passion project for a year, but then you went into the work that you knew. And then what happened where you said, okay, I want to explore voice work at this point?
Well, it had been percolating for a long time, I think. And for me, I tend to do a lot of planning before I make a big jump. Usually, I've gotten better at just, ready, aim, fire in later years, which I think is good because sometimes if you take the leap, you just have to make it work. um, but
I'm learning that,
yeah.
Jody. Yes.
It's something you learn, seriously, over time. It takes time and to be comfortable with who you are, exactly. Um, knowing who you are is really important in that case because then you can rely on what you know your strengths to be. So when I decided to make the shift, it was more I had been thinking about it for a number of years. 95, 96 was when I first understood it was a thing. I mean, I didn't really understand that it was actually a profession you could have until then. And it had been sort of in the back of my mind for a long time, and I really didn't quite know how to start, but I wanted to do something that was a little more artistic than the very computerized work that I had been doing up until that point. And, little did I know that half of this job is technical.
Even more so now, yes.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I don't really have a problem with it. I think that worked in my favor that I was a computer nerd and I was okay with that. But yeah, it just kind of it was in the back of my mind for a long time, and then I just decided when I was that bored that it's time to take the leap, and I just did it.
And it's safe to say that you've done really well for yourself. And I want to back up and talk about your music and your singing. And you grew up in a very unique household. And actually, when I was reading a bit about how you describe what your parents did in lieu of bedtime stories, it
Hmm.
reminded me a little bit of how I grew up because my mom also sang me to sleep and
Hmm.
sang songs to me. And one of the tracks that you have on your album, which we'll talk about in a moment, is one that she used to sing to me. But share with us a little bit about what your parents did at bedtime when you were a child.
Well, we had sing along instead of story time. So my dad played guitar and my mom sang. And actually, that's how they met. They met because their parents introduced them knowing both of them were musical. And so they actually, I think, performed at a couple of clubs together for a little while.
Oh,
And then,
really?
yeah.
Oh, I love that. I love that.
Yeah. So they had some fun there. And that was always a first love of theirs. They were always musical. My dad plays guitar and piano by ear, and my mom has always been a really, really talented singer. So, when they thought of what bedtime should be for their kids, it wasn't storytelling, it was music. And it was kind of music that the whole family could get involved in. I have a younger sister, and we would all sing together. So it was always something we did as a family.
That is so fantastic. Gosh, it reminds me when I went to, this was ages ago when I was dating this man, and we went to, first time I met his family, and they all stood up and sang like 4-part harmony before we ate.
Oh
And
my
I'm like,
god.
yeah, I mean, I studied voice and I sang in choir, and my
Mhm.
mom was a singer, but to get up before you eat and sing, and they're all like, join in. I'm like, no.
A little much when you're first meeting someone.
Yeah, yeah, it is, which is maybe why I'm married to someone else right now, but
Uh-huh.
I digress. So, in 2004, you were the Pegasus Award recipient for Best Filk Song. I have to
Yeah.
be careful how I say that word. Best Filk Song with your composition, The Lady.
Mhm.
And for those who may be unaware of what filk music is, can you share a bit about that and how you became interested in that particular genre?
Oh, well, I'm a computer nerd, but not only am I a computer nerd, I'm also a media nerd. So basically a fan. And I have been a gamer for a really, really long time. And when I say gamer, I mean like Dungeons and Dragons. I mean like tabletop gaming. I'm not talking about video gaming. We're talking about the stuff that you did in the 70s. So I've been doing that a long, long time, and through that medium at a game, I actually met someone who was a filker, and the way that he described it was science fiction fantasy themed music that happens at fan conventions. So, like science fiction fantasy general conventions, they all have a musical component that happens after hours or even during hours in certain out of the way places in that convention center, and people gather and they perform, and then there's what they call filk circles, so people sit around in a circle and they all take turns and sing together and play instruments together, and kind of like a campfire thing but with a science fiction fantasy type theme to it. So songs that are about that
Do
basically.
you make up your own lyrics or
Yeah.
take okay, you're not taking content from the film and, like, making a song out of it, but you're just creating impromptu on the spot.
Not impromptu on the spot necessarily. There are different genres of filk, like there are different genres of music, and people write their own lyrics, they write their own tunes, they perform their own performances of what these end up being, and it can be in just about any genre of music that you might think of. So, really, filk music is what is played at filk gatherings, which just
Okay.
happen to take place in science fiction fantasy conventions, usually. Although there are conventions that have their own, like Filk has its own convention now. They're all by themselves. It's basically a music convention with a science fiction fantasy theme.
Did your composition then, and, maybe a different way of asking the previous question was, did your music come out of your time in these kind of music in the rounds, or was it actually written for a convention that you went to?
Good question. The music came way before Filk. I was already doing music. I've been performing live actually since I was about 11. Uh, just, on stages at my schools. And writing songs of my own. I was doing that when I was young as well. And I play piano by ear, although it's been a long, long time since I've done that. Um, but that I had going, before I ended up in Filk. But the person I met at gaming introduced me to two other women that he was in a band with, and that when we got together, we were making Filk music, and that was kind of the first time I'd ever heard that term or knew anything about fan-run conventions, actually, in the first place. So that was sort of my introduction, and eventually what happened was, he he didn't last. I became fast friends with the other 2 women, and we joined a band of our own called Urban Tapestry, and, then as we were attending these conventions, we would write songs for different albums that we would put out, and The Lady was one of those compositions, and it was actually based on Anne Rice's Interview with the Vampire,
Interesting, okay.
so that makes it Filk.
I once read that for every hour you spend talking or interviewing someone that you don't know or may not know very well, that one should spend about 4 hours researching and getting to know about them.
That's a lot of time.
It's a lot of time. It's a lot of time, and I think that was probably more for, say, a journalist
Mhm.
or, a 60 minutes type interview, if you will.
Sure.
So, I'm not sure I spent 4 hours discovering you,
Nor would I
Jodi.
expect you to.
But I do realize you started as a singer, and yet in 2015, you released a gorgeous solo album of original compositions and standards and cover songs entitled Time Will Tell. And I actually bought your album last night. I was
Oh,
typing up my
thank you.
You're welcome. I mentioned that only because I said, "Okay, well, let me hear this album." And I heard snippets enough, and I said, "I want more." The one, and I should say you produced it with your writing partner, Chris Conway. Is that someone who you are still
Mhm.
working with?
Yes, in fact, I just spoke with him today.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we were just on a video conference call, like, right before I got on with you.
Well, one of the I love the arrangements that you've done.
Well, that Chris has done, because really, he's the brilliance behind that.
They really are lovely, and in nod to your fellow Canadian Neil Young and the
Mm,
track Harvest Moon, which was really lovely, as are all of them. And it's so interesting because your singing voice has a m has I mean, because you tend to speak in your middle
mhm.
range, sometimes high, and when you laugh, it's almost soprano, but when you sing, you have this very full, rich, just very present voice. And one of your original compositions, Sex and Chocolate,
Uh-huh.
I am curious as to whether or not that is truly based on your favorite Aunt Moira as referenced in your song.
Well, it turns out that, well, most of it is made up. I don't think
Oh,
that,
okay.
well, first of all, I didn't write the lyrics, I wrote the music for that one. So the tune is mine, and because I sang it, that I put together the tune. But Debbie actually wrote the lyrics, and I actually have an Aunt Myra. So I like to imagine that that was her life, but yeah, not really.
Well, I would encourage listeners to go on iTunes and, first of all, purchase the album. It's called Time Will Tell, but listen to the song Sex and Chocolate so they know what we're referencing. It's, shall we say, a little risque?
A little, but Debbie has this really quirky sense of humor that doesn't need to be truly dirty to get its point across,
Oh,
which I
not at
really
all.
love.
Yeah, not at all. No,
Yeah,
it was really a delightfully fun song.
yeah.
Transitioning to your podcast, audio branding,
Mhm.
how did that come about for you?
Well, I was in a business mastermind for a length of time, probably about 2 years, and while I was in that, a lot of them were talking about podcasting. I really didn't know much about podcasting at all. It wasn't something that was on my radar as something that I wanted to do, but as we started talking about it, it kinda made sense that maybe it would be something I'd wanna do because I have all the equipment. It's all sitting here. I just had to find out what I wanted to do in regards to what kind of a podcast I wanted. And originally, I just started with something back in the summer of 2019, and I put together a little self care for creatives that I called Jodi's Silver Linings, and it was just common sense wisdom of how to take care of yourself. And in a sense, I was enjoying myself because the medium was new to me and I was learning the ropes, but at the same time, uh, when you do a podcast, people start to assume that you have an expertise in the subject that you're talking about. And the only expertise that I really had was that I was a little older, maybe, than some of the people that were listening. And I don't know that that really qualifies you to be an expert. But, yeah, so I started being asked to be kind of a life coach for some people, and that's not at all what I had intended with the podcast. I only did maybe 30 episodes, and I did some interviews, which were a lot of fun, and I learned interesting things while doing that. But it wasn't really in alignment with what I wanted to do necessarily. So bringing this back to the business mastermind, I brought it to them and I was like, well, what do I do now? I went out and did this really quickly without really thinking about it, and this is where it led, and I don't want it to lead there. So what do I do now? And we brainstormed about it. And the conclusion that we came to was that I really should make something that is useful for the people that hire me. And really, that feeds into my business. And so that's where audio branding was born, because in a lot of cases, studios and advertising agencies and video production companies, even if they know how important the audio is, they often have to explain to their clients why it's
Mhm.
important. Why are they hiring these people? There's a reason, and they should understand that reason. So I'm kind of giving them fodder to explain to their clients. And it's given me an opportunity to interview some of my clients and the people I work with, and really interesting people in the realm of sound, because audio branding, while it's advertising and marketing and branding heavy, also has to do with how sound influences us in general. And so I wanted to talk about the psychology of that. I wanted to talk about music and science and art and, how that all intersects, because sound is a really powerful sense and it emotionally influences us on so many levels. And it's really interesting to explore those levels. So I've been exploring.
And you have some really, as you mentioned, really interesting guests. First of all, your audio branding is exactly what you did for yourself. You pulled back from a direction that either, not that it wasn't working for you, but you realized in the direction you wanted to go with your brand, it wasn't, your prior podcast wasn't working.
Hmm.
Then you reached out to your clients to give them a vehicle to explain what they're doing. But some of the things you've talked about, the woman, now I have yet to listen to this particular episode, but you shared with me about an interview you did with a woman who came up with a process of increasing your public speaking.
Oh, hmm.
Correct me if I'm wrong, because it was either she had the experience or someone that she knew had the experience that was not being promoted because she didn't have really command of her instrument or really know how to speak in
Hmm.
either a meeting setting. Maybe you can speak more to that, because I find that really interesting, and how we don't realize how that can affect us out in our relationships or work world until maybe an episode or a situation comes up like this. So why don't you, if you care to share a bit about that
Sure.
and reference the
Hmm.
episode?
The episode hasn't actually come out yet, so
Oh, that's why I
that would
haven't
be why
listened
you
to it.
haven't heard it. Exactly. I did just complete an episode with a woman named Cynthia Jai in Singapore, and she is a coach who teaches generally women CEOs how to be more commanding in their voice, or I shouldn't say commanding, have more presence. Come into their own, be who they actually are rather than some, timid mirror of themselves
Mhm.
that doesn't really reflect who they are. So it's a really interesting process that she goes through with people, and she usually takes about 6 months. And she doesn't only work with women, that just tends to be the people who seek her out. But a lot of these people just needed help coming into their own voice. And this woman in particular was passed over for a promotion because her boss thought that she didn't have the presence because of her voice. He didn't think that she had the voice that matched the position that she was going for. And it's interesting that there is that association. So she went to Cynthia in order to train herself to be able to sort of, move into that role and sound like she deserved to be in that role. And there's a whole host of different things that come into play with that, in that a lot of people are breathing wrong. We're not using our chest as another resonant instrument. We're using our head and our neck, like our throat and our nose, but we're not using our entire body. Like our entire body is resonant.
Mhm.
And you need to be using the whole thing and breathing properly, and that gives you more resonance, and more resonance allows you to make a deeper connection, I guess, have more presence in your voice. And it's really interesting that people can learn this. And I mean, I've heard from a lot of people that they just don't like the sound of their own voice. when they hear it on a recording in particular.
Sure, especially when they're not in the business of hearing themselves,
Yeah,
or even if
exactly.
they are,
Well,
actually, even if they are
yeah. I mean,
sometimes.
it happens in our profession too, but one would hope not.
I'm referring more so that when you're editing a podcast and then hearing
Mhm.
yourself for the umpteenth time.
Yeah.
It's so interesting that culturally also, it's the conditioning of how either a woman or man carries themselves, whether what their conditioning is as far as what their role is in their culture
Mhm.
or how they've moved throughout their life, and then to literally find their voice and what that can open up for them
Yeah.
is gotta be fascinating for Cynthia to help these people discover.
Yeah. I mean, just talking with her about it was really enlightening. So I'm learning a ton. Every time I interview someone, it's like the light goes on.
And how can someone hear your podcast?
That would be at audiobrandingpodcast.com.
Okay.
Pretty simple.
Wonderful, and also through your website, which we will, reference in the
Mhm.
show notes. So, Jody, it's obvious in knowing you and talking with you and, anyone visiting your website, listening to your music, your voice work, that you truly are at the top of your game and more than likely, I'm assuming, have enjoyed a good life afforded by all that hard work. But I'm wondering if you can tell us of a time or experience, and I'm prefacing the question by saying so many people hear of successes and they don't realize, really know of, they haven't heard of kind of the epic fails that have happened in people's lives
Mhm.
prior to all this success. And some people don't have them, and that's okay. But I'm curious if there is an epic fail or a time where you failed and course corrected or, learned from it and what that would be.
Well, when I first started in the voice acting business, I really didn't know what I was doing. I went on to a message board that Julie Williams had, and this was before the days of Facebook, so there really wasn't anywhere else to go. And I searched the internet and I found it. So that's where I went. And I met a bunch of people, and they were all very friendly and helpful. And I made a demo from a demo mill, not knowing any better, not having gotten any coaching. And I put it up on the message board as a look what I made. It sounds so good, like people
Mhm.
do when they think they've done something
They have it.
good,
Yes.
and it was universally panned as it rightfully should have been because I had absolutely no connection to what I was saying in that demo, and the demo mill that had done it for me hadn't coached me at all. I sounded nice. I certainly didn't sound like I meant what I said, though. So, I was particularly I will say hurt, but I it stung a lot because I like to be good at something even from the beginning. I think a lot of us are like this, right? We don't like to stumble.
Which is why people, they commence to begin because they
Exactly.
feel like out of the gate you should be perfect.
Yeah, so having that kind of criticism stung a lot, and I took a moment to do my crying and get through it, and get on the other side of that, and then I private messaged the person who had been the most strident in his criticism, and I said, "I don't know what to do. What do I do? I mean, I spent a lot of money on this, and now I'm like, what? Obviously not competitive." So, help? Um,
Now, for those who don't know what a demo mill is, can you explain that for a moment?
yeah, I'm not gonna name names because I'm
Oh, no,
sure
no,
that
no, no,
anyone yeah.
I'm not saying to do that.
Yeah, yeah. But, the thing with a demo mill is basically they will make a demo for anyone with a credit card. So, anyone who decides they wanna make a demo, you go into a studio, you do the recording, they'll produce it for you, and it'll be produced beautifully. But they're not there to teach you anything. And so if you don't already have the training, your demo is gonna sound like crap because you don't have the training. And they don't care. They have your money. So that's kind of the whole, thing of demo mills. They're basically just there to be they feed people's dreams, whether or not they should be dreaming that way.
Thank you for taking time to explain that because I'm sure you and I have both had people approach us and say, "Oh, well, I'm going here or there," and they say, "Just take a couple classes and then they'll do my demo." And you're like,
Oh,
"No, no, no, please
yeah.
don't do that."
That's not how it
So
works.
I just
Yeah.
thought it would be good if you took a moment to explain that. And
Mhm.
kudos to you for going to the very person who, kind of pointed out that this wasn't the way to go, even though
Mhm.
you had already gone there. And for you to be bold and brave enough to say, okay, I heard what you said. Now what do I
Yeah.
do?
It was seriously one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. That was a serious misstep on my part, getting the whole demo done before I had any coaching. I didn't know that wasn't the right way to go about it until after, which unfortunately was an expensive lesson to learn. So hopefully, if any of your listeners are in their beginning stages, they will learn from my mistake.
And yet, really, Jody, how would you know unless again, some of our mistakes are really expensive in not just monetarily, but other ways, which
Mhm.
is why I asked you that question because we do hear these stories of great success and you are solid. In listening to you last night, because I really delved into a lot of your demos and a lot of, your work and thought, I'm interviewing her tomorrow. I was on my walk this morning and I thought, what is her epic fail or what is her it doesn't have to be epic, but that
Oh,
is. I
that was
mean,
pretty epic. That was pretty epic.
yeah, when you spend that kind of money and you put it
Yeah.
out there and it's like, ouch. And even now, I mean, voiceover is one of the most gracious and wonderfully supportive groups to be in. And
Mhm.
yet they don't suffer fools gladly. I mean, they'll
No,
let you
which is
know
good.
it is good, but you were
Yeah,
focused
yeah.
enough and determined enough and centered enough in who you were that you could handle that
Well, I think
feedback.
yeah, well, it coulda gone either way.
Yeah, it could have.
Certainly, it coulda gone either way. But I have to say that the fellow that I asked actually took me under his wing and started to teach me how to act and this was just sending MP3s back and forth. He would send me a script, and then he'd tell me to record it, and then he would give me instruction, and I'd record it and send it to him, and then he'd give me some more instruction, and I would record and send it back to him, and we'd do the same piece over and over again until he was satisfied.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He was super, super kind about actually teaching me something. If you really want to do this, then yeah, like let's do this seriously. Take this seriously. And it is acting, no matter what you're doing, whether it's advertising for a chocolate bar or doing some kind of a bad guy in a video game. It's all acting. So, yeah, he took some time out of his busy schedule and actually taught me some stuff. And in fact, that the very first demo I did after had some of his voice on it because we were doing some dialogue. At the time, dialogue was a thing. It's kind of gone out of fashion now in demos, but in 2007, 2008, it was still very much in style. And so we had done some spots together, and he just got me to think about it and loosen up and really understand what I was speaking when I was doing a script. But I wouldn't have a career if it weren't for him. Seriously.
And that's what a lot of people don't realize is we all need mentors and or coaches
Mhm.
and finding the right one who really will support you through your efforts. And, it could have gone so many different ways. He could have shamed you. I mean, it just could have been really ugly. And yet it turned into something really beautiful. So
Mhm.
it's kind of like providence that that happened, really an expensive lesson, but yet one that turned in your favor.
Yeah, yeah.
Given how long you've been in lockdown, I'm curious if there are times when you find yourself up against fear, and if so, what skill sets have you learned to help you combat it?
Well, for me, it's almost more I don't know, what would you call it? Existential dread? I know that's like a horrible word or something, but I don't tend to get depressed, I just tend to get quiet.
Dreadful. No.
Yes, dreadful, yes. Yeah, I don't typically suffer from depression. I realize I'm very lucky that way. Generally, I have a pretty optimistic outlook, but when I feel anxiety, strangely, because of this podcast, I have discovered ASMR. And I have discovered that ASMR kind of puts me into a meditative kind of state. And that is super, super helpful for me. So every once in a while before bed, I'll watch some ASMR on YouTube and it calms me right down. And that helps a lot.
Jody, for those who don't know what ASMR,
Oh, yes. Autonomous sensory meridian response. So, what that is basically when you're watching someone whisper on a YouTube video or tap on something or reach out and touch the screen, or there's all sorts of other things that people do in ASMR videos. But the idea of it is that it's supposed to give you what they call brain tingles. So, it's kind of like when you were a kid and you were watching a girlfriend make a drawing and that sort of like made you euphoric in some strange way.
soothing. Yeah,
Yeah, like, I don't
yeah.
know, that's kind of where I first experienced it. I had a couple like, one particular girlfriend who used to draw anime, and watching her draw was, like, euphoric. I just loved it.
I
Like
had a friend growing up that was, well, she's still an artist, but yeah, same thing to watch her.
Mhm,
Is first I was in awe, how do you do that? And then it was just really relaxing because you just saw this creative image come to
mhm.
life that was, took you away outside of yourself. And maybe that's what you're referring
Yeah,
to.
not only that though, the sound of the pencil or whatever it is she was using to move over the paper, like the motion of the hands, like it just the whole thing together just sort of it was just beautiful to watch. And I didn't realize that that was probably ASMR until I started researching for my podcast. So really, this has been kind of a long time coming. The first time that I heard about this was when IKEA did a half an hour or so, I think it was like 25 minutes or something, long commercial on the different types of furniture and sheets that you could have in a college dorm, for instance.
Wait, where did this run? A
It
half hour
was
commercial?
it was everywhere for a long time. This was 2016, and it was one of these really weird phenomenons, and I listened to it or looked at it, watched it for, like, 5 minutes or something, and I'm listening to this college-aged girl, I'm assuming, talking, really in this whispery voice and running her hands over sheets and tapping on lamps and stuff like that, and I was like, what the heck is this?" I had no idea what she was doing. I didn't understand it at all. But because my podcast deals with sound in advertising in a lot of cases, I was like, well, I have to know what this is now because wow. um, at the time, I didn't realize the significance. When I started looking into ASMR and I discovered, that's what that commercial was, then I realized it wasn't for me. It was for college age students who got ASMR. So, yeah, it's been an interesting deep dive.
So is that what you do for self-care?
It helps a lot. Yeah, it does help a lot. And strangely, one of the things that I have only recently discovered with ASMR is that there is ASMR Reiki. I didn't realize that that was a thing, but apparently it's a thing, and I find it really beautiful.
There's so much to learn. Isn't it just, amazing? And like you say, some of it is, like, know your audience.
Yes.
Some of
Yeah,
it,
exactly.
it's like I will listen to a piece of music or I'll watch something and I'll go, "I so don't get this." And then I realize it's not
Yeah.
made for me. So get over yourself,
Yes.
Cheryl. You don't need to understand.
Yeah, I just have to get over myself, yeah.
So what brings you joy?
I think so many things. A nice mix of peace and usefulness. I think,
Ooh, ooh,
yeah,
that's good.
yeah. I try to arrange my life in that kind of a fashion.
When you say usefulness, or you mean acts of service, what does that mean for you?
When I say usefulness, I kind of mean my career, really,
Okay.
because this is important to a lot of people. A select number of people, but it is very important to them, and I'm here to help make sure that it goes off without a hitch.
Ties into, of course, your audio branding podcast, so people
Mhm.
do understand why you don't just grab someone off the street and say, "Please read this."
Mhm.
That's very cool that you explain that, and having that conscientious attitude towards your work at a time when, people do phone it in, and if there was ever a time to just really dig deep into what we're good at, and you certainly do that.
I like to.
Yeah.
I mean, it's fun for me. That's kind of, do what you're passionate about.
Well, that's clear. I mean, it's clear in the work you've done and in your joy in who you are. It's interesting that that's what your answer was, is being useful in your work for your clients in the work that you do. So,
Mhm.
is there something that you wish folks were mindful of right now as it relates to, gosh, how we could care for and nurture each other during this, because this term hasn't been used enough, unprecedented time?
Yeah, that's like in every script we get these days, right? Oh my goodness. I think that what I was trying to say in my first podcast was basically that you don't have to be productive every second of the day.
Amen.
And I think a lot of people, especially now that they're stuck inside and all they really have to do is their work, take some time for yourself. It's okay to Netflix and chill. If you need to, do it because you're going to come out on the other end of that feeling a lot better and able to do what you need to do a lot
Yes,
better.
yes, being refreshed, and that you just came up with
Yeah.
another podcast. I'm giving you a Netflix and chill. I'm
I'm sure there's one already
there
out
may
there.
be,
I'm
yes.
sure there is. But yeah, I mean, I think people are really hard on themselves and every once in a while you just need to sit back and do something just because you wanna do it. There's nothing wrong with
And
that.
not have to explain it to someone because as you say, when you feel refreshed, you can approach your work or whatever it is you're
Yes.
doing, teaching your
Yeah.
children or whatever you have going on at
Well,
home.
there's a reason that they tell people to put their own mask on first in an
Yes,
airplane
yes,
incident, right?
yes.
Because you can't help anyone else if you can't breathe.
But it's so funny, Jody, when I was a kid, I didn't understand that, and whenever I would hear the stewardess say that, I would get mad. I'm like, "What do you mean? You're gonna let me die, mom?" I didn't quite understand that, if she
Yeah.
didn't do that, there'd be no
Mhm.
one there to care for me, so
Yes, exactly.
what makes you hopeful?
Uh, that is such a good question. People's love for their pets. Every time I know, it sounds really, really
I know,
weird.
I love it, but I did that's the first time I've had that answer, I love it.
Well, I just, like, I see how much people love their dogs and their cats and their snakes and their, like, the tortoises and everything in between, and it just gives me hope because that's the kind of all-encompassing love that we just need to have for everybody, like, if you
Mhm.
can, you know? So if we all have that in us, we don't just have to use it for our pets.
You know what? That is absolutely true. I'm sure you've heard it said before, and this is not negating the care centers and the shelters we have for animals in any way,
Mhm.
shape, or form. But I've often thought if we took care of our fellow human beings the way we dote on our dogs at day spas and what have
Mhm.
you,
Yeah.
the world would be a lot healthier. And so, do you have a support cricket or?
I actually don't, we have no kids and we have no pets here, but my sister has a cat named Milo, and I think he's adorable.
Oh, I love that name. That's very
Yeah,
cool.
yeah. I don't see him all that often, especially not now, but he's very cute.
What is the weather like right now? What are you dealing with up there in Ontario?
Well, it hasn't been snowing, but it's kind of there's, like, residual snow on the ground, and it's just looking gray and dingy and bleh.
Wait, residual
So
from what year? Or
oh,
from
well,
you
no,
mean from,
no,
like
from this year, from, like yeah, from, like,
Okay,
maybe a week ago,
okay,
It's still here because the ground is cold,
okay.
but it's kinda lingering, and we haven't gotten any added snow, so it's just getting grayer and dingier, and
Which is really
it's
just
just
it is
awful.
dismal. It's just not fun.
I'm just as happy being inside, honestly.
Is there something else you'd like to talk about as it relates to this time in your life?
Oh, yeah, I don't know. I think you've asked a lot of questions I've never been
Oh,
asked,
well, that's
so
good.
yeah, I appreciate that.
I do have one more for you.
Sure.
Given that you are a singer and music
Mhm.
was and is such a part of your life, if there was a soundtrack that describes your life, what would it be? What would be on it?
Oh my goodness, a soundtrack. Oh. Um, You know, part of the love that I have for torch singing, for jazz, is an album that my husband introduced me to many years ago that has, if you remember the last song on my album is called "Good Night, My Love."
Hmm.
That was originally sung well, it wasn't I don't think she was the original singer of it. It was from a movie in, like, 1936 or something like that, but, Sarah Vaughan sang that, and I first heard it on a compilation album with her and Ella Fitzgerald and Billie Holiday and Lena Horne, and that compilation album of all 4 of those wonderful women singers doing their beautiful best was just mind-blowing and world-changing for me when I first heard it, and I've loved "Goodnight, My Love," that particular song, ever since I heard it, so I've been wanting to put that on an album for the longest time, and I just think it's a beautiful album, and when I hear it, it's sort of it's not ASMR, but it kind of puts me in that meditative state. And I don't know if that's a soundtrack to your life, but certainly it's something that I could listen to over and over and over again.
Well, you just happened to mention one of my favorite all-time singers is Sarah Vaughan, and I had the
Mhm.
great fortune of seeing her live at the Dorothy
Oh,
Chandler
wow.
Pavilion in Los Angeles when I lived in Los
Mhm.
Angeles, and she did a version. Now she's come close on several of her albums she's recorded "Send in the Clowns," but when I saw
Mm.
her I was never really a fan of that song
Mhm.
prior to hearing her sing that, but let me tell you, the way she sang that and her phrasing, and the arrangement, we're just sitting there bawling our eyes out. I mean, there wasn't
Mhm.
a dry eye in the house, and that album that you're referencing, you can't get any better than putting those 4 women together.
It's an amazing album. I can't remember what it's called, but if you look for all 4 of them, together, it was a CD when I got it, but but yeah, wow. Like, it was just a mind-blowing album. I loved it to death. I think I I think I wore out the CD.
Well, Miss Jody, I really appreciate this time with you, and I want to encourage our listeners to listen to your music, which really is a lovely, lovely album. And
Well,
it's
thank
you
you.
can purchase it via iTunes. Time will tell, Jodi Krangle. And if there's anyone out there looking for a voice artist to do their work after they call me, you can give Jodi a call.
I'm okay with that.
No, 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 no. I bow down to the queen. You are my guest. We are highlighting you, my dear.
I do love your voice, Cheryl, so
Oh, you're very kind. You're very kind. I will receive that, and, I'm still in the learning phase late in life.
but there's a warmth to your voice that I think is really nice to hear, and I think a lot of clients will really benefit from having that in their projects.
Well, thank you. From your mouth to their ears, I appreciate that very, very much, Jody, and I'm so happy to have gotten to know you more in the latter part of last year and certainly getting to know you more now, and I just wish you continued success, and it's a real delight to have this conversation with you and look forward to more good things coming out of audio branding, your podcast. If you wanna plug your website right now, that'd be fine, and like I said, I'll also put it in the show notes.
Well, thank you. First of all, this has been a tremendous pleasure. I love chatting with you about this stuff. And my website is at voiceoversandvocals.com.
Because that's what you do and what you are,
Mhm.
voiceover and vocals. So have a wonderful weekend ahead of us,
Thank you. You
or
too.
ahead of you, and we're just gonna hope for life to get back to whatever the new normal is.
Wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah, where we can actually see each other and sit down for a cup of coffee when that's
Mhm.
possible, and I'm believing we're gonna be able to do that soon, and in the meantime, we just take care of ourselves and stay connected in whatever way we
Yeah.
can, and, I'm just really appreciative that you and I could connect this way today.
Thanks. Yeah.
You're very welcome, Jody, and we will talk soon. You take care of yourself.
You too.
Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. a long, long way from my home. Sometimes I feel like I'm almost gone. Sometimes I feel like I'm almost gone. Sometimes I feel like I'm almost gone. A long, long way from my home. A long way from home.
That's Jodi Krangle on vocals with Chris Conway on keyboards, performing Chris's arrangement of Motherless Child from Jodi's album Timeless, and it's available on iTunes. I'd like to once again thank Jodi Krangle for joining me here on 19 Stories. I'd also like to thank the following news outlets for the use of their clips in so aptly painting the picture of the fear that we're facing during this pandemic: BBC, PBS, Now This, UNESCO, and Some Good News. I especially want to thank Joel and Luke Smallbone, otherwise known as the group for King and Country, for allowing me to use an excerpt of their song Together, which could not be a more hopeful and inspiring song for such a time as this. Finally, I'll leave you with the following from Proverbs 23:18. Surely there is a future, and your hope will not be cut off. Thank you again for joining me today. Feel free to offer feedback or a story idea at 19stories@soundsatchelstudios.com. Visit my website at soundsatchelstudios.com. Via Instagram at Cheryl Halling VO. I look forward to sharing more stories on the next episode of 19 Stories From Fear to Hope. Until then, stay healthy and hopeful.
Together with our differences, together we are bolder, braver, stronger.